Hello! So today we are going to work through a definitive start procedure for the ATR in Microsoft Flight Simulator. This is based on the actual procedures used by a real pilot who has now provided a video to Flight Simulator. So if you go and look on the Microsoft Flight Simulator channel, you can watch a whole raft of startup and procedure videos recorded by a real ATR pilot. So if anybody wants to argue with this, they are arguing with an operational skilled pilot who is demonstrating the way they start the real aeroplane. It was quite comedic. In the comments of the actual Microsoft video, there are people arguing that he's done things wrong. So I'm not even going to say any more about that. I just thought that was quite comical. Anyway, so I have written up the steps he went through. They are not so different than the steps I used. He has demonstrated hotel mode, which we will get to during the startup procedure, and I'll explain it along the way. But broadly speaking, we were doing things right. We just weren't necessarily in the right order, in true Eric Morecambe fashion. So we're going to go and jump inside the aeroplane. First thing we do is make sure our controls are configured as we expect and that we're using the correct control profile within the simulator. And I already know that I am, so we're good. Next thing we do, go to Control and 3, which takes us to the tablet. We can press the aircraft tab at the top and we select ground power to provide ground power to the aircraft. Now we press Control and 6, which takes us to the overhead panel, and we turn the batteries to on. Then we go and sit in the cockpit and we watch the boot up sequence take place. It takes about 20 or 30 seconds for things to power up and boot up around the cockpit. What you're waiting for is screens 2 and 4 across the cockpit to come to life, basically to show their normal screens. And yeah, as I said, it takes maybe 20-30 seconds for that to happen, so we'll just patiently wait for that. Apparently this is important in the real thing, that you don't go racing off doing more until this has happened, and that's why we are waiting. We are following the real procedure. It's worth pointing out, while we're waiting, here they come, it's worth pointing out that I have missed out a lot of the tests from this procedure, so we're just doing the functional parts of the procedure. We're not doing a lot of the tests that the real pilot did. So we are presuming that the aeroplane is in a good state and is not broken. Okay, so we can now go back up overhead and we can turn the external power to on. So external power is here on the main electric power section. We turn it on and a lot more lights come on around the cockpit all of a sudden. We go down to the XLT section, second column at the bottom, that's down here. We make sure the beacon light is off, we make sure the nav light is already on, so up is on these switches. Then we go over to the hydraulic power section, which is up here, and we turn on the blue pump, the aux pump and the green pump. We then go to the prop brake section, which is this one with the yellow and black striped cover. We uncage it, we turn it on and we close it. So this is part of the hotel mode, where you can run up one of the engines without the propeller spinning round and use it as a power source. Okay, so then we go to the main elec power section, second column in the middle, that's back over here again. And we're going to set DC Gen 1 and 2 to auto. Or say to on, I should say, and they will both show fault. That they will remain in a fault state until the engines are running, but there's no harm in them being on at this point. So in a way we are actually working around a flow at this point. It's interesting to say that although the pilots talk about this flow of doing everything in the columns, they don't do everything in the columns, they go jumping around all over the place. So why they talk about this in terms of a flow, I'm not really entirely sure. Anyway, in the signs section, third column at the bottom, we are going to turn the seatbelts to on and the emergency exit light to armed. We're then going to go up to the windshield heating section and we're going to turn the left and right windshield heats to on. They will show fault at the moment, don't worry about it. Then we're going to go up to the AC wild electric power. So this is the AC converters, and we turn both ACW Gen 1 and 2 to on, and again they will show faults at the moment, we're not going to worry. We are then going to go to the light section at the fourth column at the bottom. We're going to turn the annunciation light switch to bright. Then we go up to oxygen and turn the oxygen on. Okay, so then back in the cockpit, we're going to do a few things around the cockpit. We're going to configure the flight, let me get this right, the Flight Guidance Control Panel, the FGCP. So this, we know it in other aircraft as the MCP, the Master Control Panel. So in the ATRs it's called the Flight Guidance Control Panel. Okay, so we're going to set the heading, or sorry, before we do that, we're going to set the nav mode to VOR/ILS. We're going to set the heading to be the runway direction at Stansted. So if we go and scroll over here so we can see the heading bug, it needs to be 222 degrees for our takeoff runway. So we're just going to move that heading bug round to 222. We're also going to set the course to match that. So notice with the course you can't centre it up in the direction you're pointing, so we have to roll it all the way around. The heading bug, you can actually press the heading knob in, which makes it point the same direction you're facing. So there's 222 degrees on the course as well. We can preset the altitude we're intending to cruise at this point. So we're looking at the number just at the top of the altitude ribbon on the primary flight display, and we are going to move it up to 18,000 feet just for demonstration purposes today, because we're not actually going to fly the route. There we go, we've got 18,000 showing. Okay, at this point we were going to set the comm and the nav radios if we were going to use them, so you could be putting your numbers in. We're not going to bother just yet because we're not actually going to fly the flight, but it's at this point you would do it. If you wanted to set comm, you click the comm button here and you get the panel. If you want to do nav, you use the nav button. This is a touchscreen, so you can click within any of the fields and then key the numbers in, and then press enter to confirm. So that's how you could set them if you were going to. So then on the pedestal, once you had set up your VOR beacons, for example, there are two buttons back here, BRG1 and BRG2, bearing 1 and 2. And they will give you the bearings to the ILS, or sorry, the VOR or Nav Radio 1 and Nav Radio 2, and the DME, which is really useful to have on screen. Okay, so now we're going to go press Control 4 and start concerning ourselves with the MCDU, which stands for Multi-Function Control Display Unit. I never knew that until I started learning this earlier. I just knew it was the MCDU, as the Airbus pilots tend to call it. Okay, so in here we go to FMS, we go to initialization, we do pos init first, we pick up the GPS. We don't have to do this, but we're going to do it, and then we come back. Then we go to the weight section, and there's a trick here. So I was looking up these numbers previously. You just hold the key down on each field and it will automatically fill itself. So it's important, if you are setting the fuel of the aircraft in the simulator, that you do it before you start configuring the aeroplane. Obviously we could put in reserve fuel if we wanted. It's about 600 kilograms an hour it will burn, so we've got an hour's worth of reserve pre-configured, which is absolutely fine. So once we've done that, we return again. Then we can go into the performance initialization, and we can set, you can see the cruise altitude has been preset from the value we had in the altitude pre-selector. So that's all fine. And we don't have to worry about anything. This is already in max cruise, so then we can just return back. Notice we have not gone back to the normal screen. So you go menu, FMS again, init, and then you can go to flight plan initialization and route. So we can say where we're going from and to. So we'll today go from EGSS, which is Stansted, then a slash, so we are matching the format of this field here. And we'll go to Edinburgh, because it's just one that we know off the top of our heads that we can program in to pretend we're going to go fly. Okay, so that's done that. We can put a flight ID in if we want to, ABC 123, and drop that in. And then we execute that change. So that has taken us straight to the flight plan page of the MCDU. So then if we want to select a departure from Stansted, we click on it, we choose the runway, so runway 22, standard instrument departure BKY5R, and we execute that change. That brings us straight back to the flight plan page again. So we go next, and that shows us a discontinuity and then Edinburgh. So we're going to select Edinburgh, say we want to arrive on ILS 06 for example, using standard approach route AGP E1E. We're not going to bother with a transition, so we'll just execute that. If we go next again, we'll see in the middle of the route we've still got that discontinuity there. So maybe we want a VOR mid-route, so we'll go for the TNT VOR and drop it in. It's important to point out at this point that we are not going to do any airways. There is a bug in the aeroplane at launch. If you try and use airways, it will break the MCDU. If you're wondering what I'm on about, say if we knew an airway passed through Trent. If we click on Trent, we could actually say which airway we want. So we can click on here and choose the airway that passes through Trent. It will break the MCDU, so don't do it. Wait until they've fixed it. So then we clear the flight plan, sorry, the discontinuity, and then execute our change, and the flight plan is essentially done at this point. Okay, so once you have done your flight plan, you can go back to the cockpit, so press F to do that. We're going to go and look at the flight guidance control panel, the FGCP over here again. We're going to pre-select, so if we get this so we can see both, you're looking here and clicking over here. So we're going to click nav, which is LNAV. And you see at the moment it says VOR, so we flick this back to FMS. So it's gone to LNAV mode, yeah? And we can also say VNAV, because we've programmed the flight plan. There's no discontinuities, we've got target altitude, we've got performance data, we've got weights. So the airplane knows how to fly itself, so you can use LNAV and VNAV. We can calibrate the altimeters at this point, so we can just press B to make that happen, or we could roll the knob over here and on the standby altimeter to make that happen. So we'll press B, and it's already configured as luck would have it. So Control 6 takes us back overhead, and we get to the fuel section and we engage both of the fuel pumps. Then we're going through engine start at this point. So remember, this is engine start without the blades spinning. So we go to engine start, the engine start section, which is here. We turn the engine start to start A, or the ignition, sorry, the ignition system to start A. And then we press start on engine number 2. Now the engine, if we go and look down in the cockpit and press F to do this, you will see the NH number is coming up. When it gets past 10%, which it already has, we can advance the condition lever for N2 to feather. Now, if we look outside, you can hear things, but obviously there's no blade spinning because we've got the propeller lock in place. Yeah, so this is what we were talking about using it as an APU or an auxiliary power unit. So we can press Control 6 again to go overhead. We can turn the ignition knob back to off. We can go over to the main electrical power section and we can switch off the external power now because engine number 2 is providing power to the aeroplane. Okay, so then we can go Control 3 to go to the tablet and we can remove the ground power so they can get out of the way now. Before the blades are spinning, we're giving them the chance to get out of the way of the aeroplane. So then obviously we can close the doors and do anything else we need to do. And we go back into the cockpit and you can see on the EFIS screen, if we press perf down here, you can see all the stats about the aeroplane. And you can see there's a confirm takeoff data button, so we're going to go and click it. When we click it, the V speeds turn blue on the indicator, on the indicated airspeed meter. Also, you will notice on the EWD screen, which I'm not sure what that stands for, you can see there's a trim. So we can use the trim, if we've got it mapped to a control, to line it up. Yeah, so we've got the trim now lined up with what the aeroplane is predicting it needs. So then we can press Control 6 to go overhead. We can turn the beacon light to on. So this gives a clue as to what we're about to do. Normally the beacon light is switched on when you're about to start the engines. In our case, we're about to start spinning the propellers. So we are going to uncage the propeller brake and recage it. Then we come down here and we're looking for the NP to get above 10%, which it already is. And then we can advance engine number 2 to auto, and when we do that you can see that the propellers are spinning up really quite rapidly. Okay, so then we go back overhead and we're going to start engine number 1. So we've already got the fuel, or have we? Pump number 1 to on. Then we start engine number 1. So the starter for engine number 1 is here, but notice I haven't actually turned the ignition on yet. So we go back to start A. There's 2 start systems. You can use them alternately or use both at once. The real pilot just used the same one again. So we go and start engine number 1. So we come down and look in the cockpit and you'll see the numbers coming up now for engine number 1. When it passes through 10% on the NH, we can advance the condition lever to feather. And then as it comes through about 50-60%, I think it's 49 actually, but as it comes up through the meter there, you can then advance this to auto and the engine comes up to speed. Okay, so then we go back overhead, we turn the engine start system back to off, we go to the main electrical power section, we unguard the TRU switch and we press it, and then we guard it again. Again, I don't know what TRU does yet. I need to read up on this myself. Unfortunately, there's no book yet. So then we can go to the probe heats. So probe heats, if you remember, are over here. So we can turn them all on, the captain, standby and first officer probe heats. We can then press F to go back into the cockpit. We can set the flaps to 15 degrees, which I've just done on my controller, but it moved the flap lever over here. We can press the serve button for the where is it? Serve. There it is. Serve button for the EFIS display, and that will show you the transponder, so you can program your transponder at this point. Okay, then we can go over to the tablet, so Control and 3, and we are going to remove the wheel chocks. We will not start rolling yet because the emergency parking brake is still on. So then we go back to the cockpit, and this is the point where we remove the gust locks and we remove the parking brake, and now we're just relying on toe brakes to avoid rolling. So if you've got a configurable parking brake on your controller, it will be controlling the toe brakes, not that big brake lever. Okay, so if we come off of the toe brakes, we start rolling immediately. Yeah, and it's entirely intentional. So obviously we're taxiing, so I'm going to go back on the toe brakes for a second. So Control 6. So actually let's do this from the cockpit view because you can see the labels better. We're going to turn the taxi lights to on, and when we get to the runway we'll go and turn the landing lights on. So let's come off the toe brakes again. So at this point, yeah, we just roll out towards the runway. If you wanted something to keep you busy while you're taxiing out, you might want to go and configure the target airspeed if you're going to be using any particular, climb profile. So we'll go and say like 170 knots. But that only really comes into play if you use IAS mode on the climb out. Otherwise VNAV and LNAV will look after it all for you, so don't worry too much. So I'm just going to have a quick look, see what's next. So when we get to the runway, we're going to go and put the landing lights on and the strobe lights on. We'll also go and turn on that transponder. So we could do that while we're taxiing. So we'll go and turn the transponder to on. And slowly make our way out to the runway. So from this point on, it's actually remarkably straightforward to fly the aeroplane. Just rolling out. We don't need much runway with this aircraft, so we don't need to worry about, you know, using the absolute limits of the runway, certainly not at Stansted, which has a huge runway. So we confirm that the power management is set to takeoff. It is by default when you get into the sim, but it's something you can double check on the way to the runway. It remains at takeoff until you are at least 400 feet above ground level, at which point you can switch over to climb mode on the power management system. Okay, so we won't stop. Oh, actually we will. We'll go back on the toe brakes. So at this point, we're going to go and turn on the landing lights and turn on the strobes, and we're pretty much good to go. So we straighten the view up, maybe get the numbers in view. If we want the navigation display on the big EFIS screen here, all you need to do is press ND down here and you get the display. If you want to have that in rows view, you can just roll the wheel here a couple of times and then you get a giant rows view, which gives you a nice view of your flight plan. Okay, so come off the parking brake, or sorry, the toe brakes I should say, and you push your throttles to the notch detent. So I've covered configuring controllers elsewhere. So you need the notch detent on your throttles, which is essentially maximum power just below 100. Well, it's in the 80s, but don't worry too much about that. So we're looking for 120 knots to begin our rotation. We should leave the ground. It doesn't mention in the notes about the aircraft, it will pull up too early in the simulator at the moment, which you just saw it do. So a bit of forward pressure is usually required. So gear up. Looking for usually 15 degrees for the climb out, I believe. So we are easily more than 400 feet now. I'm just trimming as we go. So we'll turn the power management to climb mode. We're just flying by hand, getting the airplane stable before we go and engage autopilot. So autopilot's on, yaw damper's kicked in. Vertical speed mode is in effect, and so is LNAV, so it's going to fly the route completely on its own now. So it's going to be withholding to restrictions on the flight plan as it does it. So you can see it's favouring getting to our target airspeed, and now the nose will come up. So we'll raise the flaps at this point, which will allow us to go that bit faster, but it was favouring getting to the target airspeed before it started the climb profile. So that's worth knowing about. So from this point on, it's just a waiting game to get to cruise really. Obviously because we're in VNAV, it's going to respect any restrictions on the flight plan. So there's a nice button here where you can switch between the ETE and the ETA for each of the legs, which is really nice. Other than that, yeah, that's how you get the ATR running according to the real procedures. So I hope you enjoyed that. Hopefully it's not too difficult. Look, it's cutting the corner. That's quite cool, isn't it? So it didn't render it quite the way it's actually flying it. So yeah, hopefully that was instructive. I'll put a link in the notes of the video with a link to the checklist, which I have followed myself and I have now confirmed with you is correct. So, we'll see you again soon.